So I just want to say thank you both for joining us tonight and for creating such an incredible documentary. So I'm going to start by asking Suzannah and Chana a couple of questions, and then we're going to take it to the audience. And I know that we have a lot of things that we're thinking about, and I really want to just say to think about questions for Chana, because it's such an honor to have you here, to have our living history, to be able to answer these questions. So I am going to start with a question to Suzannah, but I know that our hope is that this conversation is really focused on Chana and her experience and questions you have about this time in Sweden. But Suzannah, I do want to start with you to just tell us about, I mean, my honest question is, how did you come across this story about Sweden? This is the first for me to hear about the experience in Sweden, so I'd love to hear about how you came across this and what inspired you to create this documentary.
Well, it was the first for me as well to hear about the stories of Sweden, Norway, and Denmark. And my inspiration was Chana. She was in my prior documentary, Match and Marry, and shortly after I interviewed her, she contacted me and said, Suzannah, you have to make a documentary about what happened to the Jews in Scandinavia during World War II. Nobody knows the story. So I'm not a historian, and I did not feel qualified to do a movie about it. But the one thing that piqued my interest was that Chana, as you saw in the film, she was a child living in Stockholm in the midst of World War II, and she had a perfectly normal childhood. So that piqued my interest. I was working at the time as a claims examiner, and my boss was very supportive of all of my video work. And when I told him about the idea, he just whipped out his checkbook, and he said, go make your next film. And so he gave me enough money to go on our first trip to Scandinavia. And I just thought, okay, the stars are aligned. Somebody up there must want me to make this film, and how could I say no? So then off we went, and 130 hours of footage later, here's Passage to Sweden. But Chana was right. People don't know the story of what happens in Scandinavia. Even people of Scandinavian descent are quite surprised. We've been around at several Q&As and several places around the country, and you know, a lot of people are learning something, and as well as I didn't know anything about the topic as well. So it's a great learning experience for me.
Amazing. And so, Chana, I have to ask, what inspired you to reach out to Suzannah and say, this is a story I want to tell?
Well, Suzannah came to my house to interview me.
We'll use the microphone.
Use the mic.
Oops.
No, it's on.
Oh, okay. Susanna came to my house to interview me for this Match and Marry. She had seen me on some cable television program. And I really wanted this story to be told. And this is what you call a match made in heaven that we met. Because it was Hashgacha. It was really ordained in heaven that I should meet, because I wanted the story to be told. I felt it was really, really sad that the world had so little knowledge about the inspirational things that happened in World War II, that we can remember that people can do good things, that people can care and be compassionate, that we can be inspired. And it's really important to look into history so that we should learn from that, and all the mistakes that we have done in the past, hopefully we won't repeat the same things again. So when she was doing the Match and Marry, and that was kind of fun, and I enjoyed her company, and then I said, you really, really, I was preparing to do my tour to Scandinavia for 25 years every summer while I was on vacation from my Board of Ed job. I did tours to Scandinavia, and I said to Susanna, you really have to come to see these beautiful countries, and you really have to find the people there and learn about the history of these countries. And that's how it all started. And then because we met all these wonderful people, every person that you saw on the screen, we interviewed and we talked to them, we became friends with them. And sometimes we contacted them by email and so on. But it became a personal relationship, so I ended up writing a book about all these people. It's called It Was Evening, It Was Morning. You can look it up on Google if you want. But it was just a fantastic experience to be inspired by all these people who lived through the Second World War, and they rebuilt their lives, and became productive, wonderful, caring people. And we have to really remember them, and it's important to just pay tribute to them.
Absolutely, and I feel like this documentary really does that, both in the people who came and survived, and also those in Sweden who did the work in making them feel welcome as
Right.
when they arrived. And so I'm actually curious of what you, because my question that I sort of came away with was, I'm curious about what happened after. What was it like for you? Do you remember when these survivors came and there was suddenly a new Jewish community? And what was it like to integrate them into the life that you had in Sweden?
Well, first I want to tell that during the war itself, one day my mother told me that I was getting a new brother, and I was so excited. I was expecting a beautiful baby. But it turned out to be a boy that was my age. He was like pre-bar mitzvah. But it was a child from a kinder transport from Finland. So in Finland, it was very interesting because the Finnish people were fighting together with the Germans against the Russians. And they were not being captured by the Germans, obviously, since they were fighting with them. But they sent the children for safekeeping. So for 2 years, we had this Finnish little boy in our house, and he became like my brother. And then we had, you saw the rescue of the Danish Jews, and that was so exciting because we had a very, very small community of Jewish people in Sweden. We were like, out of 6 million people, there were like 6,000 Jews, and that's a very small number, very, very, very not visible. Putting it into plain, ordinary English, in the whole city of Stockholm, with 500,000 inhabitants, there were 2 girls that were my age that were Jewish, and that was it. So when the Danish people came, it was very exciting for us. Of course, it was exciting for us to hear about their escape, and it sounded like, you know, like a fairy tale from Hans Christian Andersen country and all that, and that was very exciting. And they integrated, and they became part of our community. That was during the war years still, and that was very, very nice. But say after the war, it was such an incredible thing when you think about it, that, you know, like, it couldn't happen today because we have so much of the Wi-Fi, and we have so much of the communication is so different today. Hitler was such an evil man, but he was also a very, very, very clever man. And he hid everything that he was doing. So people really did not know what was going on. So if you look on the map, I mean, you know, it's like an hour's flight to go to Berlin or to any of these countries. We really had no knowledge of what was happening. We knew there was a war and there were bombs and things were bad, but we had no knowledge of how terrible it was that they had labor camps and concentration camps and people were being put into gas chambers. We didn't know anything of that. So when the refugees came, and they came in the spring in 1945, you saw my sister-in-law was one of them. Actually, both of my brothers married survivors. But when they came, it was like they started telling their stories, and people could not listen to what they were saying. So then they would start talking about their experiences and all the horrible things that happened. Invariably, people would be so traumatized by what they said that they would say to them, why don't you just have a cup of tea and some cake? And, you know, we will talk about something else. And so if you look at the literature from the Holocaust, you will see that there was nothing written for the first 20 or 30 years after the Holocaust because people were so traumatized. They realized that nobody... Oh. If she's here, she better report.
All right, sorry, continue.
So, where was I? Right. So if you look at the literature... Well, Carolina's not here, so we don't have to worry about her.
I'm going.
So, you know, for 20, 30 years, people stopped talking. They were told not to talk because people could not bear to hear what they were saying. And I have to tell you this because this is like a part that people don't really know about. But my father was a rabbi in Stockholm, and my father became incredibly, incredibly busy with the young surviving women. Many of these women were like you saw on the gravestones, they were in their early 20s. And many of them had been married before the war. They got married early. Some got married even in the ghetto. Some got married even as things were terrible and horrible and scary. They wanted the experience of marriage. And they got married even though they knew it might not last for very long. And these girls had lost their husbands in the war, and they were left in a position that's called, had a get. They needed to get a get to go on with their lives. They were what you call enslaved, in the sense of that they couldn't date, they couldn't get married because they needed a death certificate from their husband, which of course Hitler did not issue. So they came to my father to try that he should help them find a way that they could get a Jewish divorce, which is essential if you want to have another Jewish marriage. And my father had to interview these people, and he had to find men that came from the same community that they had come from. He had to interview these people. There were no tape recorders in those days, and it was like everything had to be done by hand and written down, and it was such a difficult, difficult task. And he had to get all the information to try to backtrack till he could find out if that person, if the husband had actually died, and they had to have witnesses and everything else. And then they could get a paper to say that now they were free to marry. And the first thing that the survivors wanted, and this is so much shows the spirit of the Jewish people, these young people who came straight out of hell, who were barely alive when they came, who needed to have a lot of recuperation to just be able to stand up and walk and so on. These people, the only thing they wanted was to get married and have children and raise a family. They wanted to rebuild. Yeah. They weren't going to sit back and cry. They wanted to have a new life. So I actually could see my father, who at that time was just 50 years old, I could see his beard getting gray day by day from listening to all these stories. It was unbelievably tragic to hear what they had gone through.
And it's incredible that you had such a unique opportunity to see this because of the role that your father played in the community as the rabbi. Not many people probably even knew that so much was going on, and so it's incredible that you had such a unique extra insight into all of this. I'd love to turn it to questions in the audience for those who have any questions for Chana. Juliet will come around. Juliet, there's just a woman. Oh, sure, and then we'll go right to you in the back as well.
First of all, thank you for such a lovely film. It's more than lovely. It was a wonderful film. But I'm just wondering, do you have any idea of what percentage of the refugees who came to Sweden remained in Sweden?
Go ahead.
That's really a little bit hard to know, but all I can tell you is that today they have a day school in Stockholm, and they have about 300 students there. It's called the Hillel School. The population at my time, when I was living there, was 6,000. Today, it's like 20,000. And that's not because they had so many children, because the birth rate in these countries is like 1.5 children. You always wonder where the half comes in, but that's how it goes.
And
so, yes, a lot of the people stayed, like this Lenke Rothman, she became a very, very famous artist, for example. Or Magda Eggens, the one that we interviewed, she wrote books and she became quite well known. A large, large number of people stayed. Unfortunately, if we believe that we want to continue the Jewish people to marry other Jewish people, there was a lot of intermarriage. There was a tremendous amount of intermarriage. The girls were like so incredibly happy to have somebody be kind to them, to care about them, to be concerned about them, and they were just so tired of what they had gone through as Jews that many of them just decided they wanted to settle there and start a completely new life. So it's really hard, but it's a whole nice group of people that ended up sending their children to day schools and that are raising a nice Jewish generation there.
Great. We have a question?
Thank you. I have family that emigrated from Poland to Sweden. My cousin's grandfather, who I did not know, was in one of the ghettos, and my cousin still lives in Stockholm. Could you speak, if you know information about the Polish community that emigrated to Sweden and anything more about that? Thank you.
Again,
And it was a devastating, powerful, poignant, wonderful movie.
That's for Suzannah.
Thank you.
Suzannah really put a lot of work into it. I kept calling her every couple of months, Suzannah, what's happening? What's happening? When are you getting it ready? And finally it came. Oh, and I have to say I'm very excited tonight because Susanna's mother is here and Susanna's brother is here and some other family relatives of hers. And I am very fortunate. I have several of my grandchildren here. I have Jakob and Miri and David and Shira. And I have my two daughters here, Sterne and Razy, and a couple of their friends, Helene and Marla from the Five Towns. So we have like a nice showing of family.
It's
here.
impressive.
And
It's a Hana reunion. It's a Hana family reunion.
yes, it is a family reunion. And I also want to say that I'm very, very happy that all of you came tonight because I know, usually like Holocaust literature, Holocaust films is something that is a little overwhelming for people. But I think, Suzannah, you did a fabulous job with putting the spin on so
Thank you.
that it should be an inspirational film, so that through all the sadness and all the tragedy, which we can't deny and take away, we see humanity. And it's very important to see that, how people were willing to help each other and how people went out of their way to care for each other and so on. The way you heard that my sister-in-law spoke when she said that she thought she was in paradise. And she couldn't believe that, it's incredible. Can you imagine for them, they came an hour away from, they had lived in hell, in total hell, and they come to a country where people were going past the fence because they were like put behind the fence until they had recuperated a bit and so on. They were throwing in boxes of candy and stuffed animals and toys. They couldn't believe that there were people that were kind in the world anymore. They were used to people who were brutal.
And do you know,
Oh,
Hannah,
I'm sorry,
about
I
the...
didn't ask
That's
about the
okay.
Polish community.
Yes, the Polish
Okay,
community.
my father's shul was an Orthodox shul. It was called Adas Yisrael. And basically the people that went to that shul were of Polish and Russian descent. So they continue that, and they still have that shul, and they still have people there, and they have daily services there. So a lot of them stayed together. If they stayed in big cities, they generally held on to the tradition and religion. If they moved to small towns, that was difficult for many of them.
Great. Our next question, I see right here in the front.
Yeah,
we're
we'll use
actually
the
recording the Q&A, so we're just going to pass you the microphone. Thank you.
Like this.
Perfect.
What impressed me in the film, above all, was the fact that the Danish people kept the apartments of the Jews who were arrested and kept it for a year or two. And when the Jews came back, they found their apartments. Now, in France and Italy, 5 minutes after the Jews were arrested, their neighbors went in and plundered their apartments. So what makes one people do one thing and another people do the opposite?
So I think that a lot has to do with leadership. And King Christian X was the leader in Denmark. And his attitude toward Jews was that Jews were not separate. Jews were citizens, just like everybody else was a citizen. Everyone that was a citizen deserved his care and concern. And he I have to blow your picture or whatever. They never wore stars in Denmark. And King Christian X said that if they said that the Jews have to wear stars, he's going to wear a star, and so would all the Danish people do. So they never wore a star. But his leadership was so strong, he never left the country. He stayed there all the time. And I know you've always heard the story about wonderful, wonderful Copenhagen and Niels and what's his name? Borge. Victor Borge. There's something very warm about the Danish people and something very friendly about them. They like peace, they like quiet, they were never interested in having big battles. They didn't have the big Vikings like they had in Sweden or in Norway. They were like a much more quiet, peaceful country. But he really set the tone, and it's the leader that sets the tone. So in Norway, they only became independent in 1905. So they hadn't been independent for so long to begin with. And they were desperate for independence. And they absolutely didn't want anyone to rule over them. So they fought for 2 months until they were put down by the Germans. And the king left the country and went to live in England. And that's why Quisling was able to take over. And that's why they were able to arouse the people to become Nazi-oriented and German-oriented. So much has to do with leadership. And I wish there were young people that came around to hear this, because it's so important that we know who we elect for our leaders in our own country and who we have as examples for us.
So we're going to take one more question in the audience, and then, because of our time, and I do want to acknowledge that I know that there are at least 2 people in the room who actually lived this experience also of the documentary, and so I do want to also give them an opportunity, if they're interested, to just say something if they'd like to. So let's take one more question.
Hi, thank you again. And what I'd like to know is, will this film be shown anywhere else so other people can see this film? Or will it be on, streaming or something?
That's for Suzannah.
Yeah. The film happens to be coming on to PBS next year. Yeah, and it will premiere on January 21st, ahead of International Holocaust Day, and so it will stream and it will be broadcast for the next 3 years after it premieres around the country. So. But we will still be doing private screenings and Q&As, and hopefully it'll get into the schools, and the sky's the limit. So thank you for asking.
And I'll also add that I know that Suzannah brought a few DVDs that she's selling, so if you're interested afterwards, come find her.
And I also want to say, if any of you are interested in having programs in your schools, I'm speaking that for Suzannah, that I really think that high school students should be learning about this, and college students. I think they're so oblivious to a lot of this that has happened, and I think it's important for them to know. They say if we forget what happened in history, we're apt to repeat the same thing again. And I think it's really, really important that people be exposed to a film like this, where they can be inspired, where they can learn about World War II, but that they can also see that we can be human beings and we can do good things for people. So I think if you're interested, you can see if we get more distributions.
Thank you, Hannah. She's a very good publicist.
And then Suzannah likes to talk about Raoul Wallenberg.
Well, I think that she wanted to.
I was going to say, if any of the people who had introduced themselves to me before would like to, you're more than welcome to. Would you? Oh, a question for you, Hannah. When did you come to America?
I came to America in 1947, and I was very, very unhappy about leaving Sweden at that time. It was a very big adjustment, because you know what it was like coming to America. Sweden was so sophisticated that it was like just as modern as the most modern communities in America. So when my relatives tried to explain to me that you walk into a little room and the door closes, and guess what? You go up, up, up. I said, oh, we had elevators in Sweden too. Or they would say, hey, you know, we want to see something interesting? You go on these stairs and just stand there, and you don't have to move, and the stairs take you up. I said, oh, we call it the rulltrappa. That's an
Escalator.
an escalator in Sweden. And, you know, they had no idea. They thought that we came from a country that was like the shtetl that they had left in Europe. And they came to show us, look what we have. We have strings that hang from the ceiling, and you pull the string, and look what happens. Voila, a light goes on. And my mother said, oh, we didn't have that. We had buttons in the wall. So, you know, it was like really disappointing because there was nothing here. But we did have some things during the war that were difficult. We had like rationing cards, and we didn't have bananas, for example. And once they got a shipment of bananas, and it was only for children, so I was the only one to get them, and I was so excited. And I started to bite into it, had no idea you had to peel it. And I said, this was a horrible fruit. And then we had a boy that lived in our house for a while. He came from Denmark, and he got a big box with something very exciting from America. And he opened up the box, and he took it out, and he was taking it out bit by bit and eating it. And it crunched and crunched. And I was so jealous, and I wanted to know if I could have some of that. And he says, no, it's mine. It was a box of cornflakes. Well, we didn't have cornflakes in Sweden. We had oatmeal and maple and all kinds of cereals and stuff, vitina, but we didn't have boxed cereals at that time, so.
So my friend here, Helena Weinreich, was actually one of the people that was rescued by your white buses. She was found in a body of corpses, and she was like 92 pounds after doing the death march from Bergen-Belsen. And she was brought to Sweden, and she wrote her story while lying in a bed in a hospital. She was there for over a year, ended up volunteering to work in that hospital for several years afterwards. But her whole life, the whole story that she writes is how they reclaimed her faith in humanity. And to this day, she always says it's the Swedes that reclaimed her whole faith in humanity. So just wanted you to know, I was so thrilled to see that this was happening, but I learned so much more than Helena's story, which is pretty amazing. But I learned so much from your story, and you did it in a fabulous way. It was so entertaining, but so sharp, and the video mixed in with the real life thing made it very powerful. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to say thank you to all of you for coming, because it's a real treat to see you all here. So I'm happy that the JCC does such good programming and have such nice people here, and thank you all for being here.
Great.
Ditto for me. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. Thank you everyone for coming, and look forward to seeing you again for our future films. Thank you.